A young woman kneels by a river washing silk. The fish swim up to look at her face, and they forget how to swim. One by one, they sink to the bottom. Now, imagine you rule the most powerful state in the land. The enemies you crushed send you this woman as a gift. You think you've won. You think she's a prize. You have no idea they just handed you the one thing your army could never stop. By the time he understood what she truly was, it was already too late. For him and for everything he ruled. Let me tell you the story of a woman so lovely that 3,000 years later, we still can't decide whether she was the most powerless person in this story or the most powerful. It was the spring and autumn period, about 2,500 years ago, long before China was one country. Back then, it was a scatter of kingdoms, all of them watching each other the way wolves watch across a clearing. Now, our story starts in the south, in a kingdom called Yue, around what's today Zhejiang province, where the rivers run slow and green and the air smells of mulberry and wet stone. In the villages there, the women carried their silk down to the stream to wash it, beat it on the rocks, rinse it in the cold water day after day. And there was one girl who washed her silk there. We don't even know the name she was born with. She was just called the silk washer's daughter. She was poor, she had nothing, but she had a face that, well, let me put it this way. The story goes that when she knelt at the water's edge, the fish would swim up to look at her, and then they'd forget how to swim. They'd just sink to the bottom of the stream, stunned. The Chinese have a phrase for it, 沉鱼, sinking fish. 25 centuries later, it's still part of how the language describes a beautiful woman. And my favorite detail is this one, because it tells you everything. She wasn't well. She had some kind of trouble with her heart, and when it pained her, she'd pressed her hands against her chest and draw her brows together. And somehow, even her wincing in pain made her lovelier, not less. Now, there was a plain girl in the same village who decided that must be the secret and started copying the frown everywhere she went. It did not go well for her. The Chinese still have an idiom about it, but that's a story for another day. Now, while this girl is kneeling by her river, 100 miles away, there's a king on his knees too, but not by a stream, in a stable. His name was Goujian, king of Yue. A few years back, he'd gone to war with the kingdom next door, the kingdom of Wu, and he'd lost. Badly. The king of Wu didn't kill him. He did something worse. He took him home and made him his servant, made the king of Yue feed his horses and bow and live in the dirt. And Goujian swallowed all of it. He bowed, he waited, and when they finally let him go home, he did something I think about a lot. He hung a gallbladder from the rafters of his room, bitter as poison, and every single day before he ate, he'd reach up and taste it, just to put something bitter on his tongue, just so he'd never ever forget what had been done to him. He even slept on a pile of firewood instead of a bed. The Chinese call it 卧薪尝胆, sleeping on brushwood, tasting gall. It's one of the most famous phrases in the language for a man nursing a long, cold revenge. Goujian wanted Wu wiped off the map, but he'd already lost to them once on the battlefield. He needed another way. So his ministers came to him with a plan. And it wasn't a plan about armies. There's an old idea in Chinese strategy. They call it 美人计, the beautiful woman's stratagem. It goes like this. You don't have to beat a strong man. You just give him something soft enough that he stops paying attention. Find his weakness and feed it until it eats him alive. Goujian's minister, a sharp man named Wenzhong, and an even sharper one named Fanli, they told him to send the king of Wu a gift he couldn't refuse. Send him the most beautiful woman in the kingdom. So Fanli went looking for her. He searched the whole kingdom of Yue. And one day, he came to a village in the south. And down by the stream, he watched the fish forget how to swim. He found his weapon. What he didn't know was that he'd also just found the one person he would never be able to keep. They brought the silk washer's daughter to the capital. And it's here she finally gets the name history would remember. Xi Shi. The moment they named her, she stopped being a girl from a village. She became a project, a weapon of the state. And they didn't just hand her over. They spent 3 years making her. 3 years! They taught her how to walk so that every step looked like it meant something. How to dance, how to play music, how to dress, how to sit in a room full of powerful men and bend it without any of them noticing she was doing it. They took a poor girl who had never owned anything and they built a woman that no court on earth could look away from. And the man in charge of all of that was Fan Li, the one who found her. Now, you can probably feel where this is going. 3 years, the spy and the weapon he was forging, side by side. Somewhere in those 3 years, he fell in love with her. And she with him. It didn't matter. She was never his. She belonged to the plan, to Yue, to a man's revenge hanging from a rafter. When the day came to send her north, the histories don't give us some tearful goodbye. They don't tell us what passed between them. And maybe that's the truest part of the whole story. Some things you carry out in silence, because saying them out loud would make them too heavy to carry at all. So, Xi Shi walked into the palace of the king of Wu alone. A gift from a beaten people, wrapped up and handed to the very man who had beaten them. His name was Fu Chai, and he never stood a chance. Fu Chai lost his mind over her. He built her palaces. He built her gardens to walk in. And here's the detail that tells you everything. He built her a long wooden hallway, and underneath the floorboards, he buried rows of big clay jars and laid the boards loose on top, so that when Xi Shi danced down it, in her shoes, the whole corridor would ring under her feet like a drum, like music. They called it the corridor of echoing shoes. A king turned an entire hallway into an instrument just to hear a woman walk. And while he was doing all of that, he stopped doing his job. He stopped governing. He emptied his treasury. He let his kingdom drift. He had one old advisor, a loyal one, a hard, honest man named Wu Xu, who served Wu his whole life. And Wu Xu saw exactly what was happening. He went to the king and said it plainly. This woman is not a gift. She is a knife your enemies put in your own hand. Send her back, or Wu is finished. Now, Fu Chai didn't want to hear it, and the more the old man warned him, the more it grated, until finally the king had had enough, and he ordered his oldest, most faithful advisor to take his own life. Wu Zixu obeyed, but before he died, he left one request. He said, "When I'm gone, cut out my eyes and hang them above the eastern gate of the city, because I want to watch the soldiers of Yue come marching through it." That's how far gone Fu Chai was. He killed the one man telling him the truth to keep the woman who was the lie. And 100 miles south, Goujian was still tasting his bitter gall, still waiting. His armies were rebuilt now, quiet, sharp, ready. He was just waiting for Wu to go hollow enough to fall. And it fell. When Goujian finally marched on Wu, there was almost nothing left to stop him. The treasury was empty. The best advisor was dead. The king was somewhere else in every way that mattered. The kingdom that had once brought Yue to its knees was rotten all the way through, and it came apart like wet paper. And just sit with that for a second. A whole kingdom, armies, walls, a king, brought down not by a bigger army, but by one woman who never once picked up a sword. If a story like that doesn't make you want to hit subscribe, I generally don't know what will. Stay with me, because the ending is the strangest part. Fu Chai lost everything. And right at the end, when it was finished, he finally remembered the old advisor he'd forced to die. He remembered the warning, word for word, and he was so ashamed to face Wu Zixu in the next life. Before he died, he covered his own face with a square of silk, so that in death he wouldn't have to meet the eyes of the man who'd told him the truth. Silk, the same thing she'd been washing in that river the day all of this began. The same eyes he'd ordered hung above the gate, the eyes that watched Yue march in, exactly like their owner said they would. So think about who actually won this war. Not the generals, not really even the kings. The thing that brought down the kingdom of Wu was a poor girl washing silk by a river, handed to a powerful man as a gift, who quietly, patiently became the crack that everything else fell through. Which leaves the question the Chinese have been turning over for 25 centuries. Was Xi Shi a victim here? A girl with no choices passed from one man's hands to another's? Or was she the most powerful person in the whole story, the only one who actually bent history? And what happened to her after all of this was over? Nobody knows. That's the honest answer. The histories don't agree, and they never have. One version is beautiful. It says that when the war was won, finally, the man who found her, who trained her, who loved her, gave up his rank and his titles, took her by the hand, and the two of them slipped away on a small boat out into the lakes and the mist, and were never seen again. That after all of it, the spy and the weapon finally just got to be two people. They say finally went on to become one of the richest men in all of China, the man who walked away from power and ended up with everything. The other version is darker. It says the people of Yue looked at her, at this woman whose face had already destroyed one king, and they were afraid a weapon like that could never really be set down. So they tied her in a leather sack and they dropped her in the river, and she sank. She came from a river, and a river is where the story leaves her, the most beautiful woman who ever lived, sinking quietly out of sight, just like the fish all those years before that took one look at her and forgot how to swim. Now, there's another Chinese story I genuinely can't shake. Picture a young scholar who falls for two women at the same time. One of them is a fox spirit. The other has been dead for years, and neither of them will let him go. It's on your screen right now. Click it to watch, and I'll see you in the next story.